My daughter-in-law grabbed my arm in my own kitchen and said, "Sign the papers, old man. This company was never really yours anyway." I just looked at her hand on my sleeve, then looked at her face and smiled. She didn't understand what that smile meant. By the following Monday, she and my son would have nothing left to sign for. Before we go further, subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from right now. I read every single one. My name is Gerald Harmon. I'm 64 years old, born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. Spent 31 years building a commercial flooring business from a pickup truck and a borrowed tile saw into a company with 11 employees, 3 service vans, and contracts with some of the largest hotel chains in the Southeast. I know what it means to work for something. Every callus on my hands, every early morning, every bid I lost, and every one I won. I built that company the way you build anything worth keeping. Carefully, patiently, one decision at a time. My son Derek wasn't always someone I needed to protect myself from. I want to make that clear from the start, because the man he became wasn't the boy I raised. The boy I raised used to sit on an overturned bucket in the warehouse after school, watching the crews lay tile, asking me questions about grout spacing and load-bearing subfloors. Smart questions. Curious ones. I used to think he'd take over the business someday and do it better than me. His mother, Patricia, passed away from ovarian cancer 8 years ago. Derek was 27. We held each other in the hospital parking lot afterward, and I told him we were going to be okay. And we were for a while. Grief does strange things to people. It cracked Derek open in ways I didn't fully see until it was too late. Melissa came into his life 14 months after his mother died. She was introduced through a mutual friend at a cookout, and the speed at which things moved should have been a signal I paid more attention to. Within 6 weeks, they were inseparable. Within 5 months, he'd proposed. I flew in from Nashville to Dallas, where he'd relocated for work, met her over dinner at a steakhouse, and spent most of that meal watching her catalog the room rather than engage with the conversation. The way she looked at Derek wasn't how Patricia used to look at me. It was the way a person looks at something they're planning to redecorate. They married in a destination wedding in Scottsdale that cost $30,000, 14 of which I contributed at Derek's request. A gift, I told myself. Parents help with weddings. That's just what you do. The first 2 years were manageable. They lived in Dallas. I ran the business in Nashville. We talked on Sundays. Melissa was polite in the performative way of someone who hasn't yet decided how much she needs you. Then Derek lost his regional sales manager position during a restructuring. Melissa's event planning business, which had never quite launched, quietly dissolved, and my phone started ringing more often. The calls had a pattern. Derek would start with how things were going, then ease into a question about the business, then suggest that maybe he should come back to Nashville and help me run things. I was getting older, after all. The company was doing well, but the industry was changing. Didn't I want someone I could trust handling operations? I said yes. I want to be honest about that. I said yes because he was my son, because I missed him, because Patricia was gone, and Derek was the only family I had left, and because part of me genuinely believed he might step into this role and find himself again. That was my mistake, not the business decision, but the belief underneath it. I let hope override observation. They moved back to Nashville in the spring. I had a spare bedroom in the house I'd owned for 22 years, and I offered it while they got settled. Derek said it would be a few months. 6 at most. That was 2.5 years ago. The first year, Derek threw himself into the business with real energy. He learned the software, built relationships with 2 of our contractors, and brought in a hotel renovation contract worth $60,000. I was proud of him. I told him so. Melissa, meanwhile, had converted my dining room into a workspace for her relaunched event planning venture, which consisted mostly of Instagram posts about aesthetics and a website she'd paid someone $900 to build, which had produced 0 clients in 18 months. The dynamic shifted so slowly, I almost didn't notice. Derek began copying himself on supplier emails I hadn't included him on. He started referring to the company as we in conversations with clients in ways that implied partnership rather than employment. Melissa started using phrases like when Derek takes over at dinner as if it were already settled. I let these things pass, the way you let small things pass when you love someone and don't want to create conflict in your own home. Then the comments started. Melissa had a talent for delivering contempt wrapped in concern. At breakfast one morning she said, Gerald, you really should let Derek handle the bidding process. The software has changed so much, and I worry you're not keeping up. I was the one who'd purchased that software and trained the crew to use it. Another time, in front of my office manager Diane, she said, "We've been thinking about rebranding the company. The logo looks like it's from 1987. It was from 2019. I'd paid a designer $3,000 for it." The worst ones came at night when Melissa would sit with Derek at the kitchen table after dinner, talking in low voices that went quiet when I walked in. "I am 64 years old, not deaf. I heard enough. He's going to run this into the ground before he ever lets go of it. You need to stop asking permission. You're his son, not an employee. The company should already be in your name. He's just holding it over you." I sat with those words in the silence of my bedroom and understood something. The erosion was intentional. Melissa wasn't adjusting to our home. She was renovating it. She just hadn't gotten to the foundation yet. 6 months ago, a woman named Carol Whitfield walked into my life at a woodworking class I'd joined on a whim after my doctor told me I needed to reduce stress. She was 61, a retired nurse with silver-streaked hair and the kind of laugh that came from somewhere real. We started having coffee after class on Thursdays, then dinner. Then she became the part of my week I looked forward to most. When I mentioned Carol to Derek, his reaction was measured. Cool, but measured. When I mentioned her to Melissa, her eyes moved to Derek in that way couples communicate without speaking, and I knew the calculus had shifted. A woman who mattered to me was a variable they hadn't accounted for. 2 weeks later, I told them I'd invited Carol to Sunday dinner. Just the four of us. I thought it was time. Melissa stood up from the couch before I finished the sentence. "I'm not comfortable with that," she said. "We don't know this woman. You've known her, 3 months? This is our home." I want to pause on those 2 words. Our home. Not your home, Gerald, our home. "This is my house," I said, keeping my voice level. "I bought it in 2001. My name is on the deed. Carol is someone I care about, and I would like her to have dinner here." "Derek." Melissa turned to my son. "Tell him." Derek set down his phone and looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Not embarrassment, not conflict, resignation, as if he'd already chosen a side and was tired of pretending otherwise. "Dad, maybe ease into it. Melissa's been feeling unsettled lately. Can't you give it some time?" "She's been here 2.5 years, I said. "How much time does she need to feel settled in someone else's house?" Nobody answered that. I had dinner with Carol alone that Sunday. Told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Gerald, you're a patient man, but patience has a limit, and yours has been reached." I agreed. I just wasn't sure what to do about it yet. That changed on a Tuesday night in February. I'd been in my workshop, a back room off the garage, where I keep my woodworking tools and the half-finished rocking chair I'd been building for 6 months. It's the kind of project that requires no urgency. That's the point. You move at the pace of the wood. You don't force joints. You wait for the right moment to apply pressure. I was sanding the armrests when my phone lit up with a text from Derek's number. "You need to start thinking about retirement. Melissa and I have been patient, but this is dragging on. Stop clinging to the business and let me run it. You're embarrassing yourself." I read it twice. Embarrassing yourself. In a company I built from a pickup truck and 14 years of 60-hour weeks. I set the phone down on my workbench, face up, and looked at it in the light from the overhead lamp. Then I picked up my sandpaper and kept working. Here is what people don't understand about woodworking. The grain will tell you everything if you're willing to listen. You can't force a piece of wood into a shape it doesn't want to take. But if you understand its structure, if you've been paying attention to how it wants to move, you can guide it toward exactly the outcome you intended. You just have to be patient enough to let the process unfold on its own terms. I had been patient for 2.5 years. I set down the sandpaper, picked up my phone, and scrolled to the name of a man I'd worked with for 19 years. Martin Graves, business attorney. Not a close friend. A trusted professional. I sent him a message at 11:14 on a Tuesday night. "Martin, I need a meeting. Business and personal assets. Some urgency. This week, if possible." He responded in under 4 minutes. Thursday, 10 a.m., my office. I turned off the workshop light and went to bed. I slept without difficulty for the first time in months. What Melissa and Derek did not know, what they had never thought to ask about, was that I had begun restructuring my affairs quietly and carefully 3 years earlier, shortly after I noticed the first signs of where things were heading. When Derek first started copying himself on supplier emails, I had mentioned it to Martin in passing during an annual contract review. Martin, who has the professional instinct of someone who has watched families dissolve over conference tables for 3 decades, looked at me over his glasses and asked one question. "Gerald, are your ownership documents airtight?" I had thought about that question for 3 days, then scheduled a follow-up meeting. Over the following months, we had reviewed and restructured everything. The business ownership was consolidated into a revocable trust, entirely under my control. Employment contracts for Derek were formalized, clearly designating him as an at-will employee with no equity interest. My personal assets, the house, the investment portfolio, 2 rental properties in Franklin, Tennessee, were documented with complete clarity of ownership. Nothing dramatic. Nothing they would notice because they never asked about these things, they assumed. An assumption, as I have learned, is a remarkable vulnerability in someone who believes they have already won. Martin's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, with windows that looked out over the Cumberland River. He had the organized calm of someone who charges $400 an hour and earns every cent of it. "They've been there 2.5 years?" he asked, after I summarized the situation. 2 years and 7 months. And this is the text. I showed him my phone. He read it without expression. In writing, from his number. "Yes. And the verbal statement your daughter-in-law telling you the company was never really yours, were there witnesses?" My office manager, Diane, was present for several of Melissa's comments. Not that specific one, but others establishing the same pattern. Martin leaned back. "Gerald, the documentation we prepared 3 years ago was thorough. Everything you want to do is fully within your rights. The question is sequencing. What outcome are you looking for?" "I want them out of my house," I said. "I want Derek's employment terminated with proper notice. I want my company clearly, unambiguously, and publicly understood to be mine alone. And I want them to understand, concretely, what it costs to mistake generosity for weakness." Martin nodded slowly, already writing. "Then let's begin." We spent 2 hours mapping it out. The employment termination, properly documented, with 2 weeks severance. The formal notice to vacate the residence, 30 days, consistent with Tennessee law. The ownership documentation filed publicly with the county, removing any ambiguity about the company structure. And one additional element I had been considering for some time. 18 months earlier, Derek had asked me to co-sign a personal loan for $22,000. He described it as a business investment, a stake in a friend's logistics startup. The startup had failed within a year. The friend had disappeared. The loan balance, now $19,600, was still outstanding. My signature was on the documents. "Can I withdraw co-signing support?" I asked. "Under Tennessee law, with documented estrangement and change of financial relationship, yes. It's a formal process and the bank will notify the primary borrower, but it's fully within your rights." Martin looked up. "Are you certain?" He told me I was embarrassing myself, I said. "In my own company. That I built. That his mother watched me build from nothing, year by year, until she was too sick to see the finished thing." I paused. "Yes, I'm certain." Martin nodded once. "Then let's be methodical." I drove home along the river as the sun went down over the west side of the city. Nashville spread out in the early spring twilight, familiar and complicated, the way home places always are. I had spent 31 years watching this city grow around the business I was building. I had buried my wife here, I had raised my son here, and now I was sitting alone in my truck on a Tuesday evening, about to dismantle everything that had calcified around the life I'd built. I felt, more than anything, clear. The next morning I was at the kitchen table with coffee when Derek came downstairs. He stopped when he saw me. Something in my posture must have told him that the conversation from the night before was not over. "Morning," he said carefully. "Good morning. I've scheduled a meeting with Martin Graves for this afternoon. You're welcome to have an attorney present if you'd like." He blinked. "What kind of meeting?" "Business matters." I stood, rinsed my cup. "I'll be out until mid-afternoon. You and Melissa have the house to yourselves." I left him standing at the refrigerator with his hand on the handle, not yet sure what to be afraid of. The meeting with Martin lasted 3 hours. By the time I walked out, the termination paperwork was drafted. The vacate notice was prepared for courier delivery. The county filing was in motion, and Martin had received my signed authorization to initiate the cosigner withdrawal from the bank. I did not go home that night. I called Carol from the parking garage and told her I needed dinner and a chessboard. She said she had both. We ate chicken piccata at her kitchen table, and I told her what I had set in motion. She asked me twice if I was sure. I told her twice that I was. Then she poured us each a glass of wine and said, "Then let's talk about something else." That was exactly what I needed. The courier arrived at the house the next morning at 10 o'clock. I knew because Martin sent me a delivery confirmation at 10:17. By 10:32, I had 11 missed calls from Derek and 4 from Melissa. I was at a job site in Brentwood, inspecting a tile installation for a hotel lobby renovation. I let them go to voicemail. The termination notice was clear. Derek's employment with Harmon Commercial Flooring was being ended effective in 2 weeks, with severance as provided in his employment contract. The residence notice was equally clear. They had 30 days to vacate the property at my home address or begin paying market rent of $2,400 monthly. I answered on the 14th call. Derek's voice came through the speaker at a register I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "Are you serious right now? You're firing me? You're kicking us out? I'm terminating your employment as provided in your contract and exercising my right to reclaim occupancy of my property. Both notices include the relevant documentation. This is because of that text." I was frustrated. I didn't mean it. "Derek, do you remember what the text said?" Silence. "You told me I was embarrassing myself. In my company, after 2.5 years of you and your wife treating my home like a hotel and my business like a transfer of wealth that hadn't been finalized yet, my voice was steady. This is not because of one text. The text was just the moment I stopped pretending." Melissa got on the line. "You're doing this because of that woman. You want to clear us out so you can move her in. This is about Carol. This is about respect, Melissa. Something that has been absent from your end since the week you moved in. We will contest this. You can't just throw family out like tenants." "You are tenants," I said. "You have been tenants for 31 months. Rent-free tenants at that. The notice period is 30 days, consistent with Tennessee law. I suggest you use the time productively." I hung up before she could respond. The next morning I began moving the things that mattered most out of the house. Not everything, there was no urgency to leave, and the house was legally mine in every way that mattered. But I wanted to be somewhere quieter, somewhere without the particular electricity of 2 people calculating their next move on the other side of a wall. I had already arranged to stay with Carol temporarily while the situation resolved. She had a guest room and the wisdom not to make it uncomfortable. Moving boxes into her spare room that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't expected. Lightness. As if I'd been carrying weight distributed so gradually across years that I'd stopped registering it as weight at all, and only noticed its absence when it was gone. Derek came to Carol's house 2 days later. I saw him through the window and opened the door before he knocked. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked, honestly, like his mother looked in the last weeks of her life, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with the body. "Can we talk?" he asked. "About what?" "About fixing this. About everything." He paused. "We can't afford to rent somewhere else right now. The deposits, the moving costs, Melissa's business hasn't had a client in 2 years," I said. "I know that. I've been watching it not have clients from the desk it occupied in my dining room." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Derek, what's fair? Walk me through what's fair." "You've lived in my house for nearly 3 years without contributing a single dollar toward the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries I bought every week, or the expenses I covered without mentioning because you were my son, and I didn't want to keep score. And in return, your wife told me the company was never really mine, and you sent me a text calling me an embarrassment." I leaned against the doorframe. "What's the fair version of this story?" He didn't answer. "There's a timeline in the notice," I said. 30 days. I'd suggest using them. As I started to close the door, he said, "What about the loan? I got a letter from the bank." I paused. "Yes. You withdrew as cosigner." "I did? Dad, we can't pay $19,000. We don't have." "I know you don't have it. I knew you wouldn't when I signed those documents. That's why the decision to withdraw now versus later carries different weight." I looked at him directly. "When you needed that money, I signed without hesitation. No conditions, no contract, just trust. You repaid me with contempt. So yes, I withdrew." He stood there on Carol's front step with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. So that's it. You're just done with me. I'm done being treated like a problem to be managed in my own life. That's different. I softened my voice slightly. If you ever figure out the difference between the man Rachel, between the man Melissa shaped you into, and the man I raised you to be, then we can talk. But that's not today, and it's not my work to do. It's yours. He left without another word. I watched him walk to his car, drive away, and disappear around the corner at the end of Carroll's street. That evening, I called my office manager, Diane, and told her what had happened. She had worked for me for 16 years, through the expansion, through Patricia's illness, through everything. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Gerald, I have to tell you. 3 weeks ago, Melissa called the office and asked me to forward her the accounts payable summary for the last quarter. I told her I wasn't authorized to do that without your approval. She told me to keep it between us." Another pause. "I should have told you sooner." "You told me now," I said. "That's what matters." 2 weeks passed. Derek and Melissa were still in the house, which was their legal right under the notice period. I stayed with Carol, checked in on the business each morning, and let the machinery of what I'd put in motion run at its own pace. Martin called periodically with updates. The county filing had been recorded. The bank had processed my cosigner withdrawal and issued formal notice to Derek. The employment termination had been acknowledged in writing. I found out they were looking for apartments. Diane heard it from one of the junior crew members who'd overheard Derek on the phone in the warehouse parking lot. They were finding, as I had known they would, that the first, last, and security deposit required to rent a decent apartment in Nashville ran close to $7,000, money they did not have in any account I was aware of. Having spent the last 30 months living as though the cushion beneath them was permanent, Melissa started an Instagram account around this time. I didn't follow it. Carol mentioned it. Melissa was posting about toxic family systems and financial abuse, and narcissistic parents who punish boundaries. The posts were eloquent, curated, and almost entirely fictional. The comments filled with sympathetic strangers who knew only the version she'd offered them. I asked Carol if it bothered me. I thought about it honestly. It did not. Melissa had always been performing for an audience. The audience had just changed. The people who knew me, Martin, Diane, the contractors I'd worked with for decades, the clients whose floors I'd laid with my own hands before I could afford a full crew, they knew exactly who I was and what I had built. Social media outrage is written in sand. Business records, court filings, and property deeds are written in stone. The court date for formal eviction arrived. I had filed after the 30-day period passed without payment or departure. They'd stayed through the deadline, I believe hoping I would relent. I did not. The courtroom was familiar territory in the abstract way of someone who has signed enough legal documents to understand how these rooms function. I sat beside Martin, organized and prepared, with a folder containing the property deed, 31 months of utility bills in my name, the original vacate notice, and the certified mail receipt showing it had been received and signed for. Derek and Melissa sat 20 feet away with a legal aid attorney who looked exhausted before the proceedings began. The judge was a man in his late 50s named Judge Calloway, the kind of person whose face suggests he has heard every variation of every story and stopped being impressed by any of them approximately 20 years ago. Martin presented our case methodically. Sole ownership established. Proper notice given and documented. Offer of market rate rental terms declined. 30-day period expired without compliance. Their attorney argued hardship, family obligation, the cruelty of homelessness. Then Martin stood for cross-examination. Counsel, your clients cite hardship as a defense. Can you describe their financial hardship in the context of their monthly expenditures over the past year? Their attorney hesitated. Martin continued. Producing printed documentation, I recognized bank statements obtained through the discovery process. Your client's combined accounts reflect regular expenditures, including a $212 monthly streaming and subscription service package, frequent restaurant charges averaging $1,100 monthly, and a weekend trip to New Orleans in November that totaled $1,800. He paused. This during a period they claim prevented them from contributing to housing costs of any kind. Melissa's jaw tightened visibly. She had not expected the financial records to surface. Judge Calloway looked at Derek over the top of his reading glasses. Mr. Harmon, in the 31 months you resided in your father's home, did you contribute financially to mortgage, utilities, groceries, or any household expense? Derek stood slowly. Not directly, no. But we helped around. I'm asking about financial contributions. Yes or no? No, Your Honor. Did you have a written agreement guaranteeing you could remain indefinitely without payment? No. But do you have documentation of any kind establishing a claim to this property? A pause. No. Judge Calloway set down the papers. The plaintiff is the sole documented owner of the property. Proper notice was given and received. The offer of market rate rental terms was declined. There is no legal basis for the defendants to remain. He looked at both of them, with the expression of someone delivering a verdict that was obvious before the proceedings began. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. You have 21 days to vacate the property. If you fail to comply, the court will issue a writ of possession, and the sheriff will enforce it. Any personal property remaining after the deadline becomes the property of the owner. The gavel came down. Melissa made a sound I will not describe. Derek stared at the table in front of him. Their attorney made a brief argument for more time. Judge Calloway denied it with 3 words. The motion fails. Martin and I walked out into an April afternoon that smelled like cut grass and distant rain. He shook my hand in the parking lot and said, without ceremony, that was straightforward. It was supposed to be, I said. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before driving away. I thought about Patricia. About the afternoon, we'd signed the closing documents on the house 2001, 32 years old, terrified and excited in equal measure, Patricia squeezing my hand under the table because she could feel how nervous I was. She would have understood every decision I'd made in the past several months. She would not have advised me to make them any sooner. She believed in patience the way I believed in proper joinery. You wait until the moment is right, then you commit fully. I drove to the job site and spent the rest of the afternoon working. It helped. They were gone in 18 days. Martin called to tell me the keys had been left on the kitchen counter. I drove to the house alone that evening and walked through each room. Some furniture was left pieces they couldn't move or couldn't sell. There were holes in the drywall in the back bedroom, 3 of them, roughly the shape and height of a fist. The carpet in Melissa's former workspace was stained with something that had not been there before. The garage had been used as storage for equipment I didn't recognize and would have to dispose of. I photographed everything, filed the insurance claim that afternoon, and called a contractor I trusted to assess the repairs. Standing in the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast alone for 31 months while the sounds of someone else's life filled the rooms around me, I felt something unclench in my chest. The house was mine again. Entirely, quietly, mine. A week after the eviction, I received a call from a woman at the bank the co-signed loan had gone to collections. Derek had been unable to pay, unable to find a replacement co-signer with qualifying income, and the account had defaulted. His credit score had dropped by more than 200 points overnight. He would not be financing anything, a car, an apartment lease, a new business venture at favorable terms for a long time. I did not feel triumph. I felt the clean, precise satisfaction of consequence following cause, the same feeling I get when a dovetail joint fits together on the first try. 3 months passed. I sold the house in July to a young couple, both teachers, just married, first home. They walked through it with the particular carefulness of people who understand what they're taking on and intend to honor it. I walked away with proceeds that, after the outstanding mortgage and closing costs, left me with a comfortable surplus. I used part of it on a 2-bedroom craftsman bungalow in East Nashville, with a proper workshop space in the back. High ceilings. Good natural light. Room for Carol to have her own corner of the kitchen without us being in each other's way. That workshop became the best room in the house within 2 months of moving in. The rocking chair, the one I'd been working on since before any of this began, was finished in September. I set it on the back porch and sat in it the evening I completed it. The joints were tight, the finish was smooth, the balance was exactly right. It had taken 8 months, and it was exactly what I intended it to be. That evening, my phone showed a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it. Something made me. Dad, it's Derek. Using a friend's phone. I know you don't want to hear from me. I just wanted you to know Melissa left. About 6 weeks ago. She met someone at the marketing firm where she'd been freelancing. Moved to Atlanta with him. Filed for divorce last month. I'm working for a property management company now. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest work, and it's mine. I'm renting a studio in Donaldson. Small. But it's clean. I've been talking to a therapist, trying to actually understand what happened. not to assign blame, just to understand. And I think I'm starting to. I know you don't owe me anything. I know I have a long way to go before I've earned the right to ask for anything. I'm not asking. I just wanted you to say I'm sorry. I know what those words cost right now. I know they're not enough, but they're true. I hope you're okay. I hope Carol is good to you. You deserve someone who's good to you. I read it 3 times. Set the phone on the arm of the rocking chair. Looked out at the backyard in the September evening, the workshop light on, the oak tree losing its first leaves, the neighborhood quiet in the specific way of a weeknight in early fall. I wrote back. Thank you for telling me. Keep going to therapy. Keep doing honest work. That's the path. The rest we can figure out later, if you stay on it. I didn't promise anything. I didn't close any doors. I just said what was true. Carol found me on the porch an hour later and handed me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one. She knew I would. She sat in the other chair, the one I'd bought at an estate sale, the one I'd promised myself I'd build a match for, and we sat together in the dark for a while without talking. He texted. I said finally, "How was it?" It was a start. I looked at the oak tree. Not an end. Not a resolution. Just a start. She nodded. She understood the difference. That was one of the things I valued most about her. She understood that healing isn't a single moment. It's a series of decisions, made over time, one after another, like sanding a surface in stages. You don't rush it. You don't force it. You do the work correctly and you let it become what it was always meant to be. My birthday came in October. 65 years old. Martin and his wife came. Diane brought her husband. A few old friends from the industry. Carol made her mother's pecan pie, and we ate on the back porch with lights strung from the oak tree, talking and laughing about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Late in the evening, after most people had gone home, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Dad. Derek's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Happy birthday. I know I'm not supposed to call unless you reach out first. I'll make it quick. I wanted you to know I didn't forget. And I'm still doing the work. Still in therapy. Got promoted last month. Assistant property manager. It's not the flooring business, but it's a start. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I know. A pause. Mom would have been disappointed in me. I looked out at the oak tree in the dark. Carol was inside, washing dishes, giving me privacy she'd understood I needed without being told. Your mother would have been disappointed for about a week, I said, and then she would have started figuring out how to help you find your way back. That's who she was. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think he stopped? Started again? Do you think there's a version of this where we're okay again? Eventually? I thought about the rocking chair on the porch. The way it had taken 8 months and looked, now, like it had always been there. There might be, I said. But you'd have to build it. Same way you build anything worth having. Slowly. Without shortcuts. And only if the foundation holds. I understand. Happy birthday to you too, he said. I mean, not literally, but you know what I mean. I almost laughed. I hadn't heard his sense of humor in years. Get some sleep, I said. Keep going. I hung up and sat with the phone warm in my hand for a moment. Then I went inside, back to the light and the conversation and the people who had chosen to be here on a Tuesday evening in October because they wanted to, not because they needed something. That was the difference. That was what I'd spent 2 years reclaiming. Not the house, or the business, or the money, though those mattered. What I'd reclaimed was the simple right to be valued rather than used. To occupy my own life on my own terms. To be surrounded at the end of a hard day by people whose presence was a gift rather than a transaction. I'm not a man who believes in revenge for its own sake. I didn't set out to destroy anyone. I set out to stop subsidizing people who had confused my patience for surrender and my love for a resource that could be drawn down without consequence. The consequences that followed were not my invention. They were just what happens when a foundation is removed from something that was built on top of it without permission. The clocks in my workshop tick. The rocking chair sits on the porch. The bungalow on the corner of the street I chose for myself is quiet at night, in the way that only places that are truly yours can be. I chose myself. It turned out to be the right choice. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories. Drop a comment and tell me what time it is where you're watching. I read every one. Click the box on the left for the next story.